Hello students, this video is intended to give you a quick overview or a recap depending on where you live with Bootstrap. I'm going to create this page. It is primarily a Bootstrap page, and it'll also give us a little review on how forms work. So you have a folder that has this little image and a background image of the ocean, and we are going to create this using Bootstrap. All right, so I've started a project and I have created a CSS folder. In my CSS folder, I just have a blank style sheet. I've also created a folder with the images that I'm going to utilize. I'm going to utilize this little logo that says Aloha on it, and I'm going to utilize this image for the background of the page. So I'm going to start in the index, and we're going to navigate to this website called getbootstrap.com because we're going to get some Bootstrap. Okay, very funny. All right, so on this page, this should be the home page you get to, and I'm going to click on this button that says Get Started. And in Get Started, there is information to help you get started. So when we use Bootstrap, we're simply using some CSS style sheet that somebody else has written and has created lots of styles for us to tap into. And so right off the bat, I can either download a version of that style sheet onto my local computer and put it in my project file, or I can grab this link to an external CSS page that resides on the internet. And you can see, if we look at the location of this particular style sheet, it's at stackpath.bootstrap.com, in this folder, in this folder, in this folder, and there's the actual CSS folder, CSS file. Notice that it has a .min, so all this means is that it's a minified file, meaning that somebody took this CSS page, bootstrap.css, and got rid of all of the extra white spacing and line returns that humans like in order to read. So it's just a minified, a compressed, smushed up version of a Bootstrap CSS file. So we're going to link to this external style sheet that somebody else has written. And then we might tap into some JavaScript, again, that somebody else has written. So this is how we link to JavaScript. And again, notice that these files, these are just JavaScript files. There's a Bootstrap minified JS file. There's some other JavaScript files. We don't know how to write JavaScript perhaps, or maybe we do, but the bottom line is it doesn't matter because we're using someone else's JavaScript to tap into some functionality on our page. So I can either just copy all of those links, or, and what makes my life easier right now, especially for this video, and to get started up and running quickly, is to use the starter template. So I'm going to come into the starter template, and you can see in the starter template that there's the link to the external Bootstrap file we just saw up above, and here's the link to the external JavaScript files we just saw up above. So I'm going to copy this link, or this entire starter template, and come into my index.html and save it. And let's just look at it. So right off the bat, there's an H1, so I should see the typical hello world. So if I refresh that, there's the hello world. So you can already see that that H1 looks different. So if I come back into this page, and I'm going to, sorry, wrong one, think and talk at the same time. I'm going to comment out the style sheet, the Bootstrap style sheet, excuse me, and now you can see that this is the default H1. So already I can see that the Bootstrap style sheet is kicking into place because somewhere on that Bootstrap CSS that I'm linking to here, there must be a different design created for H1 tags. And in fact, we can see that demonstrated right there. All right, but this little H1 is tucked up in the top left-hand corner. So notice that a lot of the paddings and margins have been taken away or reset. But what I'm going to do is, this is very typical for, close this so we can see some more at once. So what I'm going to do is, and this is, I just said that, very typical for Bootstrap, is I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to call it containers. So anything we do in Bootstrap, remember, it's just somebody else's CSS page. And so that CSS page, that Bootstrap CSS page, has a lot of predefined classes. So if I use that class name, whatever's in the equivalent styling in that Bootstrap CSS page is going to automatically apply. So I'm going to put my H1 in a class container. And by doing so, you can see that Bootstrap says, okay, no problem. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to, let's just give this a background so we can see style equals background. I'm going to remove this. I don't like inline, in-ground, in dot one. Let me just type in-ground. It's going to be a long semester. Okay, so what I'm trying to demonstrate in a very awkward way is that that container, by giving it a class container, is giving this div about an 80% width, and it's also doing the margin auto, so it's centering that div. So now I don't have to write all of that code just by putting all of my code now inside of the div class container. It's all going to be in a centered 80% width-ish container. Okay, that was very difficult to get out. All right, I'm going to get rid of this inline style. I don't like inline styles because they're not very maintenance friendly. It's just something I did temporarily for a demonstration. All right, so now that we've got that accomplished, now let's create the form that we saw. All right, so now let's create our form. And so to create the form, I'm going to come into Bootstrap. Very funny, I was recording this and didn't hit record. So if things aren't in the same order it was when I just left it in the last section, now you know why. Okay, so I'm in this area of my Bootstrap documentation. So documentation, and in this left-hand side, there's a very nice little navigation pane. And if I click on components, then I get lots of components that are already kind of pre-wired up for me in Bootstrap, so I don't have to do all the work. So for example, there's how we can create some of those cards. We've seen those in lots of examples, probably on every web page you've normally been to. But what I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to click on Forms. And if you notice, the way that the Bootstrap documentation works is created is that here is the example. This is what it will look like if you utilize this code. And if you look at the code, it's all HTML. So nothing about this code should look kind of wonky to you. The only thing that looks different is the class names. So what we're doing here is we're saying we can probably utilize our HTML experience and notice that this part of the code is probably creating this email address, and it looks like we also have this little text underneath. And so all that's different is the class names. So if you utilize these class names, there is some place in that Bootstrap CSS file that is giving style to this particular class name. So I don't have to make all of the pretty rounded corners and all of the highlighting when I click in it. That's all being done for me in the Bootstrap CSS file. So for this example, I'm going to go down to this particular form controls, and I'm going to copy. I just want the text box, so I don't want all of these drop downs in the text area and everything. And so that's what these divs are attempting to help us do. So I'm just going to grab this one div, and I do need a form tag if I'm going to actually submit data. I'm not submitting data, so I don't need the form tag. For this example, I'm going to leave it off. And so I'm going to grab this first div, and that first div then should enable me to create this text box. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to come back into my HTML, and I'm going to put it inside the container. And the reason I'm putting it in the container is because the container, remember, is going to make it that 80% width and margin auto. So now if I save that and come back into my page, you can see that I've got a nice little form started. So if we look at the original example I had, which is this one, there's the form that's being created. Now I see that it's in a column, so I'm going to deal with that in a moment, but let's just finish this out. Looks like this should have been email, so that is incorrect in my example. So I'm going to create this name and then text area. So the text area is this one right here. So if I want to include that text area, well, again, if you notice, there's a pattern here, right? Every one of those elements, I'm getting a class form group. Okay, and in that form group, there's the label and there's the text area. So if I just copy all of that div and apply the div here. So I've got this div, not very well indented. Let me fix that. And then I'm going to create the second div, which should be that text area. So a lot of everything you see in Bootstrap is going to be organized pretty much like in sections or in divs, so you can pull groupings, or as they word it here, components over pieces at a time. Now I've got a nice little text area. Perfect. So I'm going to put this video on pause, and when I come back, I will have the name, supposed to be name, email, and message completed. And all I'm doing is going in here and changing the things that that I want to make a little different. Oh, I can just do it here. So if I look at here, for example, I wanted the first one to be name. So I would probably, you can keep these examples, but remember that the for is just a way to pair up the label with the input. So the for is matching the ID. So these two have to match. So if I want to make it a little bit more readable to myself to keep track of things, I might do something like this. And then all that's doing is, if you remember from HTML days, is if I click on the label, the cursor automatically goes into the input box. And the reason for that is because the for is attached to the ID, and therefore the browser knows, oh, these two are related. So if you click on the label, I will put the cursor in the input. That's amazing. I know. Okay, so I don't want this one to be an email. I wanted it to be a name. And then instead, for the placeholder, we might have enter your name. All right, so now I'm just applying HTML to the Bootstrap that we created. So now looks like I need to change my email address label. So instead of email, we'll put name. Perfect. And now if I look at my code, now I've got a name. So now I'm going to put this on pause, and I'll change this, and I will also put in an email. I'll just copy the email from the one we just did. All right, ready, go. All right, so through the magic of digital pause and resume, I added the next div, changed the for just to the email because that's easier for me to see. The type was email, placeholder stayed the same. I did the same thing here where I changed the for message to message because that's just easier for me to read than the long thing that came in with my copy and paste. And so now I have a text, a little form that I put together that literally took a lot longer because I'm videoing it, but if you just copied and pasted and you knew where to go, I mean, you can wire that up very quickly and you've got a nice looking little form. All right, so now looking at our example, we've got a form. Let's add our heading and this HR, this horizontal rule they call it, and then this is a Bootstrap button. So we're going to add these three next. So I'll get to the button first. So looking back at my Bootstrap, oh, buttons. That's interesting. Okay, I'll bet that has something to do with what I want. Sure enough, that looks like buttons. And so here again, you'll see all of this is HTML. There's a class applied, and then that's just HTML stuff. So apparently, if all of these buttons, in order to make them look like buttons, we can utilize the class name BTN. And then remember that you can always add a second class to something if you want to be more specific. So all of these buttons that we're seeing up here have the class button, which probably is giving it this rounded corner and making it look like a button. But then I'm guessing, and I'm not looking at the style sheet, but I would guess that this secondary class name is providing extra or different functionality to each individual one. In other words, BTN-primary is giving this button that blue color, secondary. See how that's giving a nice little, the nice little coloration too? So that's all included in that BTN class. So when you hover over it, I don't know if you can see it on the video, you can see a little animation taking place. So CSS hover probably. Anyway, so remember that you can add more than one class to a particular element, simply separating it with this space. So I think I'm going to take this primary one. I'm going to copy that, just that one, Control C, and we'll put that at the bottom of our form. I didn't mean to collapse that. Put that at the bottom of the form. And now if I look at my page, yep, that's looking good. Probably change the word to primary. Let me look at my original example. And looks like, well, it looks like this one's extending the width of our form. And the one in my example so far is not extending the width. How on earth did you do that? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So if I scroll down a little bit further, let's see, large button. Oh, look at this. It says block level. So if I look at the classes assigned to this particular button, looks like this one has 3 or 4 classes. Can you do that? Absolutely. So this one is making the text a little bit bigger. I don't really care about that. So I'm just going to take this one class name, which is BTN block. I'm going to copy that and come back into my button and add a space and a Control V and save that. And let's see what my button looks like now. Oh, that's looking better. Okay. So then let's add the header and this long line that goes across the top, which is called a horizontal rule. So that's still within my container because I want it in that 80% container column. I don't want it extending over the width of my page. And I'm going to add an H1 that said contact form. And then underneath it, we're going to add what's called a horizontal rule, which is HR. And let's just see what happens. So how am I looking now? So now I have the contact form. Can you see really lightly on, hopefully on yours, but on mine, I know it's going to be hard to see on the video. But there's a very faint gray line that's extending underneath this contact form for the width of that container. And then my form. So we're looking pretty good. All right, so now let's look at the fact that this form has 2 columns. So let's see, how do I do columns? Well, I can float, but that's better for images. Or I can use flex boxes, or I can use grids. Well, it turns out that part of Bootstrap, a lot of Bootstrap uses flex boxes to create responsive, very cool. See how responsive this is? Responsive websites. So utilizing Bootstrap CSS, I can easily create this responsive form. Indeed. Let me show you how that works. All right, so to demonstrate the idea of how Bootstrap utilizes flex boxes, let me come into layout. And I'm sorry, let me use grid. I'm going to use grid. Okay, so am I doing this one? Let me make sure. Where was I supposed to? Yeah, this is where I wanted to go. Okay, so I'm in grid. And first of all, you can see that Bootstrap is designed with all of these different viewport sizes in mind. So let's just start there. So extra small is less than 576 pixels, small, medium. You get the idea, right? Okay, and so the other thing that we have to be aware of is that Bootstrap assumes that we're going to set up, ideally, at the most, using Bootstrap, 12 columns. Well, I don't want 12 columns. I only want 2. I get that. But keep in mind that in Bootstrap setup, there are 12 columns available. So hopefully I can make this make sense. We're going to utilize this notation that says .column-md. And for example, here, let me see if I can utilize some of this to demonstrate the 12. So Bootstrap is going to say, first we have to set up a div class row, which is a way of defining this row. So this row is contained in this div. And in this div, we have one div that has class column and one div that has class col, not column, but COL. So Bootstrap is going to say, all right, well, I'm going to divide both of these columns into even columns that are going to expand across. So in Bootstrap's mind, this is 6 columns and this is 6 columns because 6 plus 6 equals 12. Okay, so here's another row that's doing this one. And in this one, we can see div classes column. So we have there's 1 column, there's 2 column, and there's 3 column. So what Bootstrap has said is, all right, you haven't defined anything else except that you're creating 3 columns. So each of those 3 columns in Bootstrap's mind is 4 columns wide. So this one is taking up 4 columns for and 4. Okay, so here's an example to expand on that. Okay, so here is, see how this one is taking up more than this and this column? So they're no longer evenly distributed. In other words, those ones above were evenly distributed. Like they were three columns, 4 columns each, right? So let's look at this one. This is a good example. Again, we have to set up a row. So this is defining this row. And if we look at this one, it just says call. But this one says call -6. So as the programmer, we're saying we want this particular column to be, this particular div to take up 6 columns. So this is in Bootstrap's mind 6, and whatever's remaining, which is 6. This one is taking up 3, and this one is taking up 3 for a total of 12. So we have to remember that Bootstrap is always thinking in terms of 12 columns, and unless we specify otherwise, which in this case we have, we said this particular one needs to take up 6 of those 12 and then distribute the rest evenly. Bootstrap's always thinking in terms of 12. So let's take that idea and we're going to apply it to the fact that we want 2 columns. All right, so utilizing the grid system, remember that we need to create I've already got a container, so that keeps it shorter in the 80% margin auto in the middle. So I need to create a row that defines the row, and then in the row I can create some divs. So if you think about it, we have a row with 2 columns, so that's each going to be their own div. So let's make that happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't want the contact form in there, so let's leave that up above. I leave the HR above our row, and so now I'm going to create a div with a class of row, and I'm going to move all of our content that we've created so far into that row. Okay, and now I need to create the other part of that row, which I want to be this information right here, right, the address and so forth. All right, so I'm going to come in and let's see, I'm just going to copy some code, and I'm just going to copy in that address. So, okay, just for time saving. Okay. Okay. How many times do you say okay? I don't know. Okay. All right. So now we need to create the fact that in this row there was a div that differentiated our 2 columns. So we had a div with a class call, which is this one. We have another div, which is this div. So remember I said everything in Bootstrap is sort of separated by divs and sections. So I'm going to create a div around my address. So I'm going to put this address information in one div because that's technically 1 column, right? And then Control V, I completely lost that. Control copy, Control V, there we go. All right, and indent those so that looks good. Okay, and then looks like I have too many of these. Hopefully you're being able to follow along with me here. So I have 1 div for my address, that's 1 column. And now I need another div around all of this. So I'm just going to do div. And that was very confusing the last time I did this. So I'm going to indent all of my form info and then close that div. Okay, so I have a row defined, and within that row I have a column that's separated in a div, nested in a div, that's the address. I have a second column defined with a div, and all of the form information is nested within that div. So here's where that call MD stuff fits in. So I'm going to give this a class equals, and I'm going to give it call-md-6. So I'll demonstrate how that works. So first of all, I'm saying this column is going to take up 6 of those 12 columns. So I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Class equals call md-6. So I have 2 equal columns, both of them taking up 6 of Bootstrap's columns, right? And that's in fact what happened. So what if I did what if I wanted this one to not take, this one to take up less room? So remember, you can split that into 12. So if I did 4 and change this to 8, now this particular column should take up less width than the other one. And so you can see that happening. This one's getting wider now. So that's how you adjust how much space. They don't have to be equal size columns. Okay. Well, what does that MD do? I don't understand that part now. So remember at the beginning where we said these are our breakpoints. So if you do MD, that means if the viewport is 768 pixels or larger, then apply this -6 that I've given you. Otherwise, what's going to happen? It'll automatically stack. So this MD portion or SM portion is everything at this browser width or above, created the way I've set up with the 6 or whatever you spaced, however many columns you set that for. Otherwise, stack it. So if we made this SM instead, let's just see what happens. So if we made this SM instead of MD, then it's going to take a little bit smaller viewport for us to get that stacked. So now I have to go a little bit smaller to stack it. So that's what all of those things mean. And at first that looks a little confusing until you understand what you're trying to do with it. But look how much easier it is to create responsive columns, right? Touchdown. Love Bootstrap yet? You'll learn to love it or hate it. It works both ways. All right, so what's next? So we're looking at our form. Looks like we have some this nice image in the background and some nice formatting. So let's tackle that. All right, so now we're going to add the image. So back in our index page, we want to, I guess I did this while you weren't looking. I added another style sheet. I added a link to my style sheet. And the idea behind this particular description of where my style sheet is located is because of the fact that my index page is in the root directory, but my style sheet is in the CSS folder. So I needed to make sure I told the browser, you need to go look in the CSS folder and then the backslash or / I guess that is, and then go find the styles.css page. All right, it's really important that you put your personal style sheet after the Bootstrap style sheet, because remember, the browser is going to read everything in order, and if it finds something that conflicts, in other words, if I had changed an H1 tag in my style sheet and then I put that style sheet before the Bootstrap, remember we saw Bootstrap changes the H1 tag, so we would have gotten the H1 styling because there would be a conflict rather than our own. So make sure, if you don't understand what I just said, just put your style sheet after the Bootstrap style sheet. Okay, so now let's do something with our styles. So I'm going to go into the styles and I'm going to type in body, because we're going to put that image across the body of our web page. So we're going to take up the whole viewport. And we'll do background, and then I'll just type in URL, and then we want to put in where to find that ocean back. And so if we look again relative to where the style sheet is, Mr. Browser, you're going to have to go out of the CSS folder so that you can find the images folder, and in the images folder you should find my ocean back JPEG. So if I do that, I need to say go up a level. So that's what the ... says. How come ... says go up a level? I don't know. I didn't write this. I'm just teaching it. So ... /, and then once you go out of the CSS folder, find the images folder, and in the images folder, find the oceanback.jpg. Perfect. So now if I save this, and we look at our web page, now I have that image in the background. Nice. All right. I'm going to take the liberty of just copying and pasting in the next bit of code, and then I'll kind of explain what I did, so that way you don't have to see me fat finger stuff. That's never any fun on a video. All right, I'm going to close up my real estate here and paste in some code. All right, so now what I've done is I'll put the index side by side so we can make sure we see what's happening. So I took that container, div class container, I gave it a background color RGBA gives us the ability to, in this fourth property, we can make it whether it's transparent or not, 1 being fully not transparent and 0 being completely transparent. So I'm sort of at an halfway point here, and 000 just is the hex value for black. Color is the text color. Margin top, I'm pushing it 20 pixels off the top. Padding, box shadow, so hopefully all of that looks kind of familiar. And for that horizontal rule, if I gave it background instead of the gray, then I should get a nice white. So let's see what happens, and that's in fact what happened. So now I have 2 columns, they're white, and I've got that nice transparent backing to my container div that we created. All right, cool. So now let's look at our example again, and looks like, I can't see it here because of my breakpoints. There we go. So notice I had a little hamburger here, and then I have this navigation. That's cool. I would like a cool navigation. All right, we'll make a cool navigation. So you mean I can do that in Bootstrap? Super easy. Oh, wait till you see it. It's going to be super cool. All right, so let's keep it open. Back to Bootstrap. And let's look at components. And let's look down nav bar. Okay, that seems interesting. So description of how it works. Notice again that there's different viewport breakpoints sizes, so that should look familiar from before. Okay, great, super. What's the point? Here's the point. So here's a nav bar that is completely created with this particular snippet of code. Again, notice how all of Bootstrap's elements are separated by one large element. So in this case, it's by a div. So recognize that the search bar isn't going to work because you have to put other functionality behind it, but at least it looks nice. All right, so I'm going to keep going down and see what my other choices are. Cool. There's a way to put a, looks like a little image. There's what they call here, there's navbar brand. So, okay, cool. I get the idea. All right, so what I'm going to do, give you the opportunity on your own to navigate through that. But this one looks pretty cool. That looks like my example. So in my example, let's just double check. In fact, you can see I copied it right from there. There's home. You did something different here, but okay, you'll kind of get to that. All right. So what I did, it was super hard, it took a long time, is I copied, I don't even have to drag it all, I want the whole piece, so I'm just going to copy to the clipboard all of this code. Now, just to reiterate a point, remember this is inside that class container, and so it's constrained to 80% and margin auto. But notice my footer and my navigation bar go all the way across the viewport. So I don't want to put this navigation in my container in this example because I don't want my navigation, I want my navigation to extend across the whole page. If you want it to just be within your container, then obviously we'll make sure you put it in the container. So that being said, here's my point. So let's see, let me, I'm going to close that out for a little bit. Okay, so here's that container. So I don't want that nav, I'm going to paste that code on top of the container. So I don't want it constrained to that 80%. Okay, so now I've got this nav. Cool. So what's going to happen? Whoa, that's so cool. Look at that. Already I have a navigation bar without having to, and it even has a drop-down link. Sweet. How did that happen? Well, if you look at your code, all it is, again, is the same thing. It's all being dictated by class names. So if I want to do a nav with the drop down, I have to make sure that I have the appropriate class names. Okay, all the rest of this is simply HTML. So I have LIs, which are ULs, list items. So if I don't want a home, let's see, home is coming back to, that's just an href tag, so you put your links in here. So if I want this to be about me instead, of course, you're just changing HTML from here. So you have to know HTML to understand how this all works and then not be intimidated by the code you're copying in. So now, let's see, now I have an about me. Sweet. I don't really want to drop down. What if you don't want to drop down? Well, that's not a big deal. You can just delete that. And then if you need more menu items, just copy that. No problem. All right, but why is this one dark and our light and our example's dark? How did you do that? Oh, let's see. I wonder if there's a class for that. Nothing looks dark there, so I'm going to scroll down some more. Oh, looks like things are getting dark. Well, I'm getting pretty savvy with Bootstrap class names, so let me see. Navbar, that probably has something with creating the navbar. Navbar dark, I'll bet that's making this dark. Notice how we're starting to see some familiar terms now. BG primary. Remember, primary made our button blue, so I bet if we did one of those other selections, I think it was danger, would have made that red. So, okay. So all I want is I don't want to copy this because I've already created my nav bar. I'm just going to take that BG dark, control copy, and put that into my nav bar here. Oh, it says nav bar light, BG light. By my power of observation, I will bet if I just make that dark, because that's kind of the way the patterns seem to be working. Let's see what happens. Oh my gosh, I am amazing. So I hope you're getting the idea that we're using Bootstrap. It takes not much time to wire up a page pretty darn quickly. All right, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to do. Well, I've got this logo and I've got a footer. So let's tackle those. All right, so through the magic of television, I have two different pages here. So sometimes you'll see that these are correct and sometimes I have a different page that for some reason I keep toggling back and forth, but you know how to do these. This is just HTML, so I just thought I would point out that discrepancy. But now we need this image. So how do we add that image to here? Well, let's look. It's just HTML at this point. There's nothing bootstrappy about that, except I have to come in and read the bootstrap. So let's see if I can kind of parse that apart. So we already know that that nav bar is set up through our nav element, so that's fine. And then I have something that says a class equals navbar brand. Saw that a little earlier. And then it looks like that word navbar is a clickable link the way it's pre-set up for me with the code I copied in. And there's an href tag, so I could make it to my wherever I wanted that to go. But here's the point. I don't want that word navbar here. I want that little image, that little aloha image that I had. So what I'm going to do instead of the navbar is utilize my HTML prowess and do an image, and then the source equals. So remember back again, I'm in index. I need to go into the images folder to get aloha. So let's do that. So images, imgags, images slash, and then it's aloha.png. Okay. And let's see what, oh my goodness, that's a little bit big, so no big deal. I will just come into my style sheet, and I will select my image, and I might do max height maybe. So don't go any higher than 75 pixels. So that enables it to shrink if we need it to, but not grow if we need it. Okay, that's better. Okay. So what else can we do? So now let's tackle the footer. Okay, so let's see. That footer looks very similar to the bootstrap. So is there a bootstrap footer? Well, not necessarily, but let's do this. Watch my thought here. Again, I want that footer to extend the width of my viewport, so I'm going to make sure that I'm going to include a footer that's outside of my container div. You want it on top of the JavaScript. Always make sure that the JavaScript is the last part of your code. So now I'm just going to create a footer. That's a semantic tag we've learned in the past. And so what did I have in my footer? I had I'm just going to copy. So, no, I'm not. All right, so footer, I think I had my name. Mark Lee. I'm going to put a special character, and remember we do that with the ampersand. I already looked up the name for that little heart that I created, so I'm not like super smart. I just found it earlier before the video. So if I use the word hearts, I need to close special characters with that semicolon, and then CIS 131 class. Perfect. Okay, so now let me look at my new page and what happens. Oh, okay. So it's there, but it looks nothing like this. Huh. Okay. Well, through my powers of deduction, I know that Bootstrap utilizes classes, and I copied all this code. I wonder, we saw how the navbar dark and the BG dark made that nice background. I wonder if we copied that. Let's see what would happen. So if I copy that and put it into my class equals, I wonder if that would work. Oh no, let's see what happens. Check that out. Super cool. All right, so you can use classes for not just things that they've provided you, but anything else. Okay, so let's see, I don't like the fact that this footer is butted up here. I would like the footer to be stuck to the bottom. I also want to change some of the padding maybe and change the color. So I think the last part of this is just cleaning up the footer. So I'm going to create a footer. And I'll do the easy stuff first. I'll do a width. I guess we don't need to do the width of 100%. We'll do a padding of 15 pixels. We'll do a text align center. So that should center the text. What else do we need to do? Color. I'll change the color of the text to gray. Of the text to gray. I'm talking and typing at the same time. Let's see what we've got now. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. Much better. But again, I'm going to use positioning to put this footer at the bottom. So remember, when we want to put something absolutely positioned, we're going to use, we have to first assign it to position. I'm going to do position fixed. So if I use a position fixed, that means that I'm trying to say no matter where things go on this page, I always want this footer to be fixed in one location. And where I'm going to fix it is to the bottom. And the bottom is going to be 0 pixels. That means the absolute bottom is where that needs to go. And that's what's happening. So it's down at the bottom. But now I lost that width because of the positioning. Okay, so who cares? I can fix that because I'm magic with CSS 100%. And now what have I got? Perfect. So now I've got a page that looks like we did with the starting page, the starting example. We can change up the menu items some, but again, that's just HTML. So let me just make sure that I'm being completely clear. So if I come into my HTML and I decide that, where's my drop down? I'm going to go up to my navigation. We already changed home. Maybe the about me would have been about.html. I think you get the idea. So for the drop down, I don't want it to say drop down link. I might want it to say hobbies. And maybe I'll create a hobby page for tennis because I love tennis. So this would need to go to the tennis.html page. Maybe I love gardening, GARDENING, and that would go to the gardening page. Or remember that you can also do, if I did a hobbies page.html, and then if I did a hashtag and gardening, what I've said is that I've created on my hobbies page, there is a section, some kind of element that has an ID of gardening. So that would take you right to that section, just kind of a review. If I did the same thing here, maybe I had the same thing for this. Hobbies. So now I'm creating a single page, and on that single page, there is an ID, some element that has an ID of tennis. So that would then take you directly to that section of that page. So that's kind of a review. Anyway, I don't have those pages set up, but now I at least have some different items here. And you can see at the bottom here, I can't do it at the same time, but that's going to hobbies.html to the ID of tennis. Okay. All right. So that is a little bit of a review. Hopefully that helps you with your projects.